You're free. You choose where you go.
I'm free, aren't I?
They laughed at the price of the wounded Navajo woman until a cowboy paid more and silenced the town. The dust came alive in Copper Bend. Not just a thin layer of grit, but a living, breathing thing that coated your teeth and salted your sweat. I rode in slow, the kind of pace a man keeps when he's got no good reason to hurry and every good reason to watch his back. My name's Caleb Shaw. It's a name that sits a little heavy on me, a bit like the past I'd been riding away from for 5 long years. But the past has a way of catching up, especially in towns like this. I'd come for flour and coffee, nothing more. A simple man with simple needs, or so I told myself. A self-inflicted lie I'd been trying to believe since the day I rode out of Fort Defiance, my soul heavier than my saddlebags. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and unwashed men, and then I heard it, the laughter. It wasn't the sound of men enjoying a drink, but a sharp, ugly thing, like glass being broken. The kind of sound that told you someone's life was being shattered for sport. It twisted something inside me, a coil of rage and guilt I'd been trying to bury. I'd seen this kind of ugliness before, back when I was a soldier, and we were civilizing the West. Back when we were rounding up the Navajo and marching them to their graves, calling it manifest destiny. The ghosts of those long marches, of the people we broke and left behind, they don't fade easy. They were a constant, quiet hum under my skin, and in that moment, they were screaming. The memory of a small girl, no older than my own sister would have been, with eyes that held a sorrow too deep for a child, flashed in my mind. She was on the long walk, and I was on the other side of a rifle, watching instead of stopping it. The shame of it was a bitter taste in my mouth, one that no amount of clean mountain air had ever been able to wash away. So when I heard that laughter, it wasn't just a sound, it was a memory, a raw, open wound that refused to heal. If you love Wild West love stories, drop one in your place in the comments for Wild West love so I know where you're listening from. I kept my hat low and my name lower. But sometimes a man's past, no matter how hard he tries to outrun it, rides up alongside him and slaps him in the face. This was one of those times. I rode closer, the creak of my saddle a quiet protest against the noise. The crowd was a cluster of hard-faced men, a sea of grime and greed, their faces half hidden by hat brims, but their eyes full of a hunger I knew too well. At the center, on a rickety flatbed wagon, was the cause of their twisted glee. She was Navajo, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, but the years had taken their toll, leaving behind a weariness that went bone deep. Her hands were bound with rough rope, the skin around her wrists already raw and angry. Her ankles were bare, bruised and caked, with the same red dust that coated the whole damn town. A simple dress, meant for work in the fields, had been torn in a way that had nothing to do with labor. It was ripped low at the neckline and shredded high on the thigh, the fabric hanging in strips that offered no dignity, only a testament to her suffering. A deep bruise, dark as a plum, bloomed on her collarbone, a mark of the cruelty she had endured. But it was her face that held my gaze. No tears, no pleas, just her eyes, dark and unflinching, fixed on nothing and everything all at once, as if she had looked so long into the abyss that she had become a part of it. Ayanna, I thought. I didn't know how I knew her name, I just did. On the edge of the crowd, I saw him, Silas Thorne, a bounty hunter with a reputation as cold as his eyes, his gaze fixed on the girl, a glint of something I couldn't quite place, but knew was dangerous. His mouth was a thin, hard line. I knew men like him didn't hunt for coin alone. The auctioneer, a fat man with a greasy mustache, was shouting, his voice a grating rasp that cut through the heat. What am I bid? A strong little piece of desert fire, $5. Anyone got 5 for the little pass. He spat a slur I won't repeat. Laughter, loud and vile, rippled through the crowd. I felt the familiar burn in my gut, the same one that had eaten away at me for years. The memory of the long walk was a sharp ache in my chest, a physical pain that wouldn't let go. I saw her face then, not the face of a woman on a wagon, but the face of a culture being annihilated. The Navajo, a people who had lived on this land for generations, were being crushed under the relentless march of a new order. Her dignity, Her defiance in the face of this grotesque display was the last flicker of a flame that had been systematically extinguished. They had taken her land, her family, and now they were trying to take her spirit. But in her eyes, I saw a fire, a quiet, stubborn refusal to be broken. The auctioneer pointed a sweating finger at her. Her people, they're the last of the lot. You know what they do to our kind. They'll slit your throat for a rusted coin. She's got no tribe left. She's just a damn animal. His words were like a hammer blow to my soul. No tribe left. That was the lie we had told ourselves, the justification for the atrocities we had committed. But standing there, watching her, I knew the truth. Her tribe wasn't just a group of people, it was a spirit, a strength that had survived and would continue to survive, long after we had finished our work. They may have taken her land, her family, and her freedom, but they hadn't taken her soul. And that was the one thing that truly mattered. I wasn't just here to buy her. I was here to atone for a sin, not for a nation, not for an army, but for myself. Another man shouted, "I'll trade a saddle and a plug horse for her." More laughter. It echoed in my ears, a chorus of mockery and cruelty. My jaw tightened, a hard knot of muscle and bone. My hand, without me even thinking about it, went to the worn leather of my gun belt, not to draw, not yet, but to remind myself of the line between a man and an animal. I didn't want to kill them. I wanted to silence them, to make them see what they were doing, what they had become. But you can't make a man see what he doesn't want to. I knew that better than anyone. The auctioneer's voice dropped, frustration lacing every word. "Damn it, boys, $2. Who's giving me $2? A voice from the back yelled, "Let the coyotes have her." And that was it. That was the last straw. I saw red. The ghosts of the long walk were screaming now, a cacophony of pain and sorrow. The memory of the men, women, and children we had marched to their deaths was a weight on my shoulders, a burden that had followed me across 1,000 miles of dirt and rock. I couldn't run from it anymore. Not here. Not now. I felt my feet carry me forward, a silent, relentless march through the crowd. The men parted, their laughter dying on their lips as I approached the wagon. I didn't make a sound. I didn't have to. The quiet authority of a man who knows what he's doing, even when he has no idea what he's doing, was enough. I stopped a few feet from the wagon, my hat pulled low over my eyes, and looked the auctioneer dead in the face. His smile wavered, then disappeared. His eyes, small and greedy, widened. "You got a bid, cowboy?" he asked, a hint of unease in his voice. I reached into my coat, my fingers finding the money I had set aside for supplies. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I didn't care. It was more than enough. I pulled out a roll of bills, my hand steady despite the fire in my gut. 20. I said the word with the force of a hammer blow. It landed in the silence like a stone dropped in a well. $20. The crowd went dead quiet. $20 hit wood. A freedom bought, a ledger opened. Ayana's eyes, wide and black, found mine. In their depths, I saw a flicker of something, not hope, not relief, but a question. "Why?" her eyes asked. "Why me? Why now?" I didn't have the answer for her. I didn't have it for myself either. All I knew was that I couldn't stand there and watch. The auctioneer stared at me, his mouth working silently. 20? You crazy cowboy? That's more than she's worth. His voice was a squeak of outrage. I didn't answer. I just peeled off the bills, slow and deliberate, and laid them on the wagon rail. The smack of the paper was the only sound. With a scowl, he untied the rope. I caught it in my hand, drew my knife, and cut her bonds free. She flinched when my coat slid around her shoulders, but she didn't resist. She tugged her boot higher, protective like there was more than skin under leather. I helped her down, steadying her bare, cut feet on the dust. "You're free," I said, my voice low and firm. "You choose where you go." Sold, I thought. To the gentleman in the trail coat. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I felt the men's eyes on me, a mixture of shock and contempt. Ayana's steps, light but sure, padded behind me as she followed. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew she was there. I knew she was with me, and as we walked away from the crowd, away from the laughter and the cruelty, I felt a new weight settle on my shoulders. Not the weight of the past, but the weight of the future, the weight of a life I had just saved, and a life I had just found. Cabin, truce, and storm. The dust of Copper Bend was nothing but a memory, a gray smear against the horizon as we rode. Ayanna sat behind me on the horse, her silence a wall as thick as the heat haze. I felt the tremor in her body, a constant, subtle shake that had nothing to do with the horse's gait and everything to do with the terror she'd just survived. I didn't say a word. My hands were full just holding the reins. My mind a storm of questions I didn't have answers for. What now? I had paid to free her. But what did that mean? What did a man do with a woman I'd just paid to free? The word bought sat in my gut like lead. I hated it. It made me no better than them, just a man with more money and a different kind of conscience. But there was no other word for what I'd done. I'd paid a price so she could walk away on her own 2 feet. We rode for hours, the sun a relentless hammer on our backs, the land a flat stretch of mesquite scrub and dry creek beds. My cabin was a squat shadow against a line of rock, a place built for a man who wanted to be alone. Now, it didn't feel so big, or so empty. When we got there, I dismounted first. My hand reached for her, a simple gesture of help, but she flinched, pulling back. "I can do it myself," she said, low but firm. She slid off the horse, her bare feet hitting the dirt with a soft slap. I saw the way she wobbled, but said nothing, just led the horse to the corral. I gave her that much, the illusion of privacy, the dignity she deserved. Inside, the air was cold and stale, smelling of wood smoke and isolation. I lit the fire, the sparks, a welcome flicker against the gloom. She stood in the corner, a dark silhouette against the window, watching me with eyes that held no trust, only wary alertness. "You can stay by the fire," I said, my voice rough. She didn't move. Her jaw was tight, arms wrapped around herself as if my coat was the only thing holding her together. I boiled coffee, the scent a thin comfort in the silence. When I handed her a cup, our fingers brushed for a second, a sudden, jolting connection. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, locked with mine. "You're not one of them," she said, a low whisper. It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about my soul. Over the next few days, her silence was a constant presence. She ate the food I set out, drank the water I fetched, but she never spoke unless it was a single, clipped word. She watched me with those same wary eyes, measuring every step I took. She was like a cornered animal, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But I wasn't the danger. The danger was out there, in the form of the men who had laughed at her, the men who had tried to buy her. They wouldn't forget. Men like that don't take kindly to being outbid. That night, a storm rolled in, swallowing the stars. The wind howled around the cabin, a sound like a ghost wailing. I sat by the fire, cleaning my rifle, the click of the brass steady against the storm's roar. Ayanna was huddled by the hearth, watching me, the firelight casting long shadows on her face. "They're coming back," she said, her voice steady. It wasn't a question. She had seen their faces too. "I know," I answered, just as calm. "We were in this together. 2 lost souls waiting for the past to catch up." That's when it happened. She reached for my hand. Her fingers, calloused and rough from years I could only imagine, were cold against mine. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why did you buy me? I know what you were. I saw men in that uniform. I saw what they did." The words hit me harder than any bullet. My past, my shame. It was all laid bare. And in that moment, I was faced with a choice. I could lie, pretend I was a hero. Or I could tell the truth and risk her walking away, leaving me to face the storm alone. The truth was, I wasn't a hero. I was the very thing she had been running from. I looked her in the eyes, dark and steady in the firelight. "I was a soldier," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I followed orders. I was on the long walk. I saw what we did. I saw a girl no older than you, with eyes that held the sorrow of a whole nation, and I did nothing. I stood there, with a rifle in my hand, and watched as we marched her people to their deaths. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Ayanna didn't flinch. She just stared, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Then, a single tear tracked a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't sorrow or fear, but recognition. She had seen the same thing. She had lived through it. And in that moment, a bond was forged between us. Not of love, but of shared trauma. The killer and the survivor. The one who had done the sin, and the one who had lived through it. I can't undo what I did, I said, raw with emotion. But I can try to make it right. I paid to free you because I saw that girl again in you. And I knew this time, I couldn't just stand there and watch. I wasn't just talking about her anymore. I was talking about my soul, my desperate desire to find some shred of honor. And in her eyes, I saw something change. Not trust, not yet, but a flicker of something new. She had been sold, beaten, and broken, but she wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. And I was a man who wanted to be something more than a ghost. The storm raged outside, thunder a low growl. Inside, the fire burned bright, and for the first time since I'd met her, the silence between us wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. She didn't speak, didn't say she forgave me. She didn't have to. She just reached for the cloth on the table, dipped it in the basin, and began to clean the bruises on my face. The touch was soft, a healing balm. A strange calm settled over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the storm outside brought, we would face it together. Tracks at dawn and canyon ambush. The storm raged for 2 days, a constant, howling presence that battered the cabin and seemed to test the very ground we stood on. It was a fitting prelude to the storm that was coming for us. Inside, the silence had changed. It was no longer a wall, but a fragile truce, a space where two broken people were learning to breathe the same air without choking. Ayanna took to the small chores without being asked. She cleaned the dishes, swept the floor, and mended the tears in my worn trousers. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her movements a testament to a life spent in survival. I watched her from the shadows, a ghost in my own house, a man who had no business being happy. But with her here, in my space, something was shifting. A sliver of light was cutting through the long, dark years. One afternoon, the wind died down, and the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the cabin in a pale, ethereal light. I was outside, mending a fence post, when I heard her voice. It was soft, a whisper that was almost swallowed by the wind. "My name is Ayanna." It was the first time she had spoken her name to me. I stopped what I was doing, my hammer poised in mid-air. I turned to look at her, my heart a sudden sharp drum against my ribs. She was standing in the doorway, the light from the cabin behind her a halo. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the mountains, at the red rock, and the deep canyons that stretched out to the horizon, her home. "They told us we were animals," she said, her voice still a whisper. "They told us our land was for them. They told us we had no past and no future." I stood there, the hammer in my hand, and listened. She told me about the long walk, about the cold and the hunger, about the people who fell and were left behind. She told me about her family, a mother who sang to the stars, a father who taught her to read the wind, a brother who could carve a perfect horse out of a piece of wood. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a shield she had built to protect herself from the pain. But I could hear the emotion in the spaces between the words, the raw, open wound that had never healed. When she was finished, the silence came back. But this time, it was different. It was a silence filled with ghosts and memories, a shared space where our pasts, hers and mine, finally met. I walked over to her, my boots making a soft crunch in the dirt. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I just stood there, my hand reaching for hers. She didn't flinch this time. She just let me take it. Her fingers were calloused, but they were warm, and they held mine with a strength that was a promise of a future, a promise of a fight. The next morning, the danger was no longer a feeling, it was a fact. I found them at the break of dawn, their tracks fresh in the damp earth. 3 riders, men with a purpose. They hadn't come for a fight. They had come to watch, to wait, to circle. I felt my blood run cold. They weren't the kind of men who just gave up. They were predators, and she was their prey. I went back inside, my mind racing. I had a rifle, a few rounds of ammunition, and a woman who had lived a life of fear. I was outnumbered and outgunned. The old, cynical part of me, the part that had seen too much death, told me to send her away, to send her to a place where she could be safe. But the other part, the part that had been healing since the day I met her, told me to stay and fight. This was not just about her. It was about me. My last chance for redemption. I was cleaning my rifle when she came up behind me. I didn't have to turn around. I could feel her presence, a silent, watchful shadow. "They're here," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I know," I answered, my jaw tight. I didn't have to ask how she knew. Ayanna was a creature of the earth, a child of the desert. She could read the wind, the tracks, the shadows. She knew what was coming. "They won't stop," she said. "They're not just looking for a woman. They're looking for a secret." I turned to face her, the rifle in my hands feeling heavy. "What secret?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes holding a silent challenge. I was a man who had spent his life running from secrets. Now, here was a woman who was offering me another one. The afternoon sun was a thin, watery presence, bleeding through the clouds as the wind picked up again. The first signs of the coming storm. I watched her as she moved about the cabin, her hands quick and sure as she packed a small bag with what little food and water we had. I counted 6 rounds left. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. We both knew what was coming. It was a silent understanding, a shared destiny. We were 2 people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. A life, a love, a chance at redemption. We waited until nightfall. The moon was a pale sliver in the sky, and the wind was a low howl that covered the sound of our feet as we moved. We left the cabin, our shadows long and twisted in the moonlight, 2 ghosts walking back into a world we had tried to leave behind. I had a rifle. She had a small, sharp knife hidden in her boot. We had a shared past, a shared enemy, and a shared future. I didn't know if we would make it. I didn't care. All I knew was that I was no longer running. I was standing my ground, and in that moment, in the face of the darkest night of my life, I felt a strange sense of peace, a sense of belonging, a sense of love. We were in the canyons, the air a sharp, cold presence against our skin, when we heard them. Horses, 2 of them. And higher up, I caught the faint silhouette of a third, holding the ridge like a hawk circling its prey. He stayed there, a patient shadow keeping watch. They were close. I pulled her behind a rock, my heart a loud, frantic drum in my chest. We waited, the silence between us a living thing. They passed, 2 men on horseback, their faces hard and cruel in the moonlight. I held my breath, waiting for them to move on. They didn't. They dismounted and began to search, their boots making a soft crunch on the gravel. I knew then that there was no running from this. There was only one way to end this. We had to fight. I looked at Ayanna. Her face was a mask of cold determination. Her eyes were hard and unblinking, a testament to a life spent in survival. I saw a warrior, not a victim, a woman who had been broken, but not defeated, a woman who had a secret she was willing to die to protect. She reached for the knife in her boot, the steel a silver glint in the moonlight. I gave her a small, tight nod. We would fight, we would win, and we would find a way to make it to the other side. The first shot was mine. I took down one of the riders, the sound of the rifle a thunderclap in the stillness. The other man went down on one knee, his hand going for his gun. He was good, but I was better. The second shot was a blur, a soft kick of the rifle against my shoulder. The man crumpled, his body a silent, broken thing on the cold ground. Ayanna was at my side, her small, sharp knife in her hand. "There'll be more," she said, her voice low and steady. "I know," I answered. We set our backs to the same rock and let the canyon choose our side. The night wore on, a silent, tense vigil. We were in the canyon, the air thick with the smell of death and anticipation. I was a ghost no longer. I was a man with a purpose, a man with a woman who had given him a reason to fight. I didn't know what the morning would bring. I didn't care. All I knew was that I was no longer running. I was standing my ground, and in that moment, in the face of the darkest night of my life, I felt a strange sense of peace, a sense of belonging, a sense of love. Wound, cave, map reveal. The crack of a distant rifle answered mine. It came from the ridge. I lay on the cold ground, my body screaming in protest, a fiery pain radiating from my side. The last thing I remembered was a flash, a deafening crack, and the blinding pain that followed. I opened my eyes to a blurry vision of Ayana's face, her eyes wide with fear, but her jaw set with a fierce resolve. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice a ragged plea. I tried to speak, but the words were a choked gasp, a thin cloud of white in the cold air. She pressed a hand to my wound, her fingers cold and trembling. The touch was a strange mix of pain and comfort, a testament to the raw, unspoken truth that had bloomed between us. "I'm here," I managed to say, my voice a broken whisper. "They're all gone. You did it." A look of quiet satisfaction flickered across her face, a fleeting triumph in the face of our dire circumstances. She had fought, not just for herself, but for us. She had proved her strength, her defiance, her will to survive. She was more than just a survivor. She was a warrior, a woman who had been through hell and had come out the other side, not defeated, but transformed. She helped me up, her small hands surprisingly strong as she supported my weight. We moved through the canyon, our pace slow and halting, my body a testament to the fight we had just won. The ghosts of the long walk had been a constant presence in my life, a silent, screaming reminder of a past I couldn't escape. But now, they were quiet. The blood on my hands was not the blood of the innocent, but the blood of the guilty. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet calm that had eluded me for years. I had finally atoned for my sins. We found shelter in a small cave, a dark, hidden refuge from the world outside. Ayana built a fire, her movements quick and sure, the sparks a bright, dancing promise against the darkness. She cleaned my wound, her touch gentle and firm, her face a mask of concentration. I watched her, a woman who had every reason to hate me, a woman who had every right to leave me to die, a woman who was risking her life to save me. My heart ached, a deep, sharp pain that had nothing to do with my wound. It was a pain of love, a pain of regret, a pain of a past I could never change. She looked at me, her eyes dark and unblinking in the firelight. "You told me you were a soldier," she said, her voice a low murmur. "You told me you were on the long walk." I nodded, the truth a bitter taste in my mouth. "I have a secret," she said, her voice a whisper. "A secret they were looking for. A secret I was willing to die to protect." My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, frantic drum. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, a story I had only seen in fragments. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a low growl. She didn't answer. She just reached into her boot, her fingers pulling out a small, intricately carved pouch. It was made of soft leather, decorated with beads and porcupine quills. It was old, a relic of a time and a people that had been almost erased. "This," she said, her voice steady, "this is the last thing my father gave me. It is a map to a treasure, not gold or jewels, but something more valuable, the last stronghold of my people, a place where we can be free, a place where we can rebuild." My breath caught in my throat. This was more than just a secret, it was a promise of a future for a people who had been all but forgotten. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the last living hope of her people. "They wanted this," she said, her voice low, fierce. "They wanted to find the treasure, to desecrate the last sacred place of my people. I wouldn't let them. I would die first." Her eyes met mine, a silent challenge. Redemption felt less like a hymn and more like breath returning. I reached for her hand, my fingers lacing with hers, and in that moment a new pact was forged. Not a pact of love, not a pact of a man and a woman, but a pact of two souls who had found a common purpose. We were no longer running. We were fighting for her people, for their legacy, for a chance at a future that was more than just a memory. I looked at her, a beautiful, fierce woman who had been to hell and back, and a strange sense of peace settled over me. Home, choice, promise. The sun was a pale smear in the sky, a thin promise of a new day. We had survived the night, and we had found a new reason to live. The men who had hunted her, the men who had seen her as a prize, they were gone. But the fight was not over. We had a new enemy, an enemy who knew about the map, an enemy who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. We were on the run again, but this time it was different. We were no longer running from our past. We were running toward our future. I looked at Ayanna, her face a serene mask in the flickering firelight. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior, a love cut from grit, not lace. By ash-gray dawn I found the spent brass on the ridge neck stamped with a crooked T Thorn hadn't left. Before dawn we slipped from the cave and ghosted back to the cabin. The morning sun was a soft wash of light, bleeding through the gaps in the cabin walls. The fire had died down to a bed of red coals, its glow a faint memory of the night's warmth. The air was cold, a raw presence that bit at the skin, but I didn't feel it. I sat in the chair, my body aching, a testament to the fight we had just won, and watched Ayanna sleep. She was curled on the bed, my worn coat pulled high to her chin, her face a mask of peace, a fragile truce with a world that had tried to break her. For the first time, I saw her not as a ghost, but as a woman. Ayanna. The name felt good on my tongue, a sound that was more than just a word. It was a promise of a future, a promise of a love that was forged in fire and blood. I got up, my movements slow and deliberate, and crossed to the stove. The metal rattled softly as I set the kettle on the grate, the sound a sharp intrusion in the stillness. I could feel her eyes on me. Even in sleep, she was a watcher, a creature of the wild who had learned to read the air, the light, the silence. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I just kept my hands busy, a man who had nothing to do but wait. The questions I hadn't asked her the night before came back to me now. What was her life before? What did she endure? Who were the men who sold her? What did they do? But the answers didn't matter. What mattered was what she had become. A woman who had been to hell and back, a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, her voice. And I was a man who had found his redemption, his love, his reason to live. The kettle began to hiss, a low, quiet sound that filled the silence. I turned and looked at her. Her eyes were open now, dark and unblinking, fixed on me. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice a whisper. The question was a low, quiet sound, but it carried the weight of 1,000 miles, 1,000,000 broken dreams. I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know. I was a man who had lived his life alone, a ghost, a shadow. I had never had to think about a now. "I don't know," I said, the words a raw confession. "I don't have a plan." A flicker of something, not fear, not doubt, but a quiet understanding crossed her face. She was a survivor. She understood. A plan was a luxury, a fantasy. The only thing that mattered was survival. She got up, her movements fluid and silent, and came to stand in front of me. She was still wearing my shirt and trousers, the clothes hanging loose on her frame, a silent reminder of how much had changed in so little time. Her hands came up and rested on my chest, her fingers a light, warm weight against the fabric. Her eyes met mine, and for a long moment, we just stood there, two souls who had found each other in the darkness. "You saved me," she said, her voice a low murmur. "You gave me a life. I will never forget that." The words were a promise, a vow. My heart ached, a deep, sharp pain that had nothing to do with my wound. It was a pain of love, a pain of regret, a pain of a past I could never change. "I didn't save you," I said, my voice a broken whisper. "You saved me. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to live." Her eyes filled with tears, a quiet, silent rain. She leaned her head against my chest, her breath a warm, soft puff against my skin. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, a man who had finally found his home. I had been running my whole life, running from the ghosts of the long walk, running from the guilt, the shame, the emptiness. But now I was home, in her arms, in her heart. We stood there for a long time, two people who had nothing left to say, nothing left to hide. The fire died down to a bed of ash. The sun rose higher in the sky, and the world outside was a loud, vibrant presence. The creek ran high and loud, a symphony of a life renewed. The land, once a silent, desolate expanse, was now alive with a new promise. A promise of a future we would face together. Ayana looked up at me, a small, sad smile on her lips. "I won't be a ghost anymore," she said, her voice a low whisper. "I will live. I will honor them. I will honor you." I nodded, a silent promise. We had a Wild West love that was more than just a feeling. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that? Even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road. And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, "Amen," below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life. The hollow preacher who redeemed 3 strangers, never realizing he saved his own life. The air inside the Rattlesnake Saloon was as thick as tar under the July sun of Texas, 1885, steeped in the smell of rotting wood, horse sweat, and the heavy, stale haze of tobacco smoke that clung to every strand of hair and every fold of cloth. The heat didn't rise so much as it crawled, hugging the warped floorboards, seeping into every crack.
Go slow, it hurts.
I'll die before I hurt you.
Go slow, it hurts. She moaned, he whispered, "I'll die before I hurt you." Vertical bar, Wild West stories. In the searing heat of August, 1868, a suffocating silence had fallen over the dust-choked plains surrounding Dead Man's Gulch, Arizona. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, the air so thick with grit and the scent of sun-baked earth that it felt like breathing dust. The sun, a relentless brass hammer in the sky, beat down on the cracked ground where nothing but the most stubborn sagebrush dared to grow. It was a place that didn't just test a man. It stripped him down to his bone and sinew, asking if he was worth more than the dirt he'd be buried in. My name is Elias Thorne, and I had lived in this desolate stretch of the territory for 7 years, a hermit by choice. A soul worn thin by the ghosts of a past I couldn't outride. My homestead was a collection of faded canvas tents and a lean-to of crooked juniper branches, a temporary refuge against a world that had long since forgotten me. I had been content with my solitude, finding a grim kind of peace in the predictable routine of my days. I tended to my small herd of goats, their bleating the only sound that broke the unending silence. My hands, calloused and thick with the history of hard labor, had learned to find rhythm in the simple acts of mending fences and patching torn canvas. My face, etched with lines from years of sun and silence, was a testament to a life lived on the fringes. I had chosen this life of isolation, believing that to be alone was to be safe, that to be unseen was to be unjudged. I had no one to mourn, no one to disappoint, and no one to leave. My life had become a predictable, repeating cycle of survival, a quiet war waged against the unyielding landscape. I had told myself that this was enough, but then the quiet broke. It wasn't the wind, nor the familiar lowing of my goats. It was a sharp, unnatural sound, a single gunshot that echoed like a scream off the distant rock formations of the gulch. A moment later, a plume of thick black smoke snaked into the sky, a stark, violent scar against the pale blue. It was the kind of sign a man in this country learns to fear: trouble, born of a kind that doesn't respect fences or solitude. My body, which had been so used to the slow pace of isolation, reacted before my mind could. My hand went to the worn grip of my revolver, the cold steel a familiar comfort against my palm. I knew, with the certainty of a man who has seen too much, that the past